Okay, let's continue down our incident response playbook path. In this video, we're going to look at ransomware. So in a previous video, we looked at how we're going to handle our data exfil. So you kind of saw the analysis take place, and then we looked at containment, recovery, and our lessons learned. Now, when we talk about ransomware specifically, part of that process also can change as well. So as we're dealing with ransomware, as we may have already dealt with it, or if we haven't dealt with it, it's quite nasty stuff, right? So the first thing that we want to do is when we're dealing with ransomware is contain this thing as soon as possible, because it can spread quite rapidly. So the very first thing that I would look at if we're dealing with ransomware would be, what's the best way to contain this? And typically is the first step, because again, it spreads so quickly and we want to contain this as soon as possible. So this could be either isolating hosts or isolating those potentially infected assets and then containing them. So we will talk about that in just a moment. So from there, we can go into analyzing. So we can do our analysis here, and then our analysis again are looking for our IOCs. So potentially, potential threats associated with those data points, again, associated with that specific event. It could be information or the images or wording on the screen. So maybe there's once the user clicked on that link, which we'll get into that part as well, because then we'll have to do interviews. So maybe let's just start there. So as we interview certain people, what happens if we go to the specific users or the specific department who experienced the ransomware? Well, what were they doing during that time? So I'm going to put here time, because we have to define where they like maybe looking at a certain invoice, processing a certain payment. If this was maybe an accounts team, were they, performing some sort of payment information? If it's maybe another department, what were they doing during this event? And we have to identify that. So that's the first part of that. So what were they doing during the ransomware? So I would look at things like, well, how did it encounter? So how did you encounter this? What were you doing at the time of activity? Again, something like maybe the URL. Maybe if there's a URL involved, did they visit? Did they click on a link? Did they download something? Didn't put a little download feature. So we don't know this at this stage, right? So I'm kind of just spitballing here. I'm sort of whiteboarding this out. I don't have anything that I'm going off. I'm just trying to think of this because it sort of plays out more realistically. So then basically from there, I would say, well, what are we doing? What were you doing when it happened? Again, could be another email address, could be a domain, right? These are all IOCs, and it could then obviously be something on the screen as well. So this is something that if we're looking at that IOC, when maybe Jan comes and says, yes, I clicked on this link, I downloaded this file, and now I'm at this screen. And maybe that screen has a bunch of stuff here. Maybe there's some specific wording, a logo, and maybe some file types there, or something that's saying, to pay this in certain pounds or Australian dollars or US dollars. Well, from this part is, well, what does that information on this screen look like? So, are there images? Are there logos of some sort? What's the text look like? Is it, Australian? Is it some other language? We define what that looks like, right? And that could also look at things like maybe, again, this is all type of information we can use to do online lookups and determine what type of ransomware this may be, along with key data as well. Like maybe there's potentially encrypted data that we have to look at, or define maybe specific data points as well. So again, that's how we sort of define that. So basically what we're doing with our analysis phase, again, is that scope. It's defining the extent of this ransomware, how that kind of plays out, what are the potential infected assets. Again, was it an email? Do we have some sort of email trace in the system that we can look at the email address or the URLs that we've seen anywhere else? So maybe we can look at our segs. So if we've got our secure email gateways, and we're using a specific vendor to do that, well, then can we go into the portal and then can we look at that URL? Is it being communicated with anyone else within the business? And then do we go away and perform some sort of recovery or remediation steps to block or not access that URL? So that's pretty much it. So again, we can also interview those people, review the people that we've interviewed. Was it also in other inboxes that we can get to it before it becomes another issue? So that sort of means, as I'm sort of thinking this out, is If we log into our gateway and then, our web filter, for example, maybe that link or maybe that email that Jan clicked on hasn't been passed over to anyone else yet because they haven't clicked on it. So if there's a certain amount of users that we can touch base with before they click on it, well, then that's us being proactive. So we can quickly go in and investigate, has this been opened with anyone else? We can start looking at maybe people's files and information and get in touch with them on how best not to click it, right? So then we'll move over into our recovery phase. So this is all about our recovery and ensuring our systems are coming back on live. So this is things from recovering the computer infected assets or the infected assets. Typically, it's our re-imaging of that host. So if that specific host has been affected, I'll kind of say infected or affected, we don't want to be trusting that machine if we've run some sort of cleaning tool. So we're going to look at another video series where I'm going to create some sort of forensic analysis as well, how we do forensic investigations and analysis. In this video, I just want to highly cover the recovery phase. However, we don't want to trust those assets as well. If we run certain tool sets, we may have to do a full recovery. So again, a backup of some sort. So this is typically a backup and making sure that its integrity of that system is the way it should have been, right? So again, we could go into the blocking state. So maybe we've got some blocking on our seg, or we're doing some sort of email rule filtering. Maybe the email addresses are associated, the domains, maybe if it's a private domain or if it's a Gmail or another sort of publicly used domain, we know what they are. So we can go away and perform those actions based on what we're seeing. So during analysis of our IOCs, we would be able to look at for those file types as well. So typically with these ransomware, there's sort of file types that, let me just write file types that are associated, right? There could be something like a .enc for encrypted, or what's the other one? Locked, right? So if there are specific file types like that that are associated with that, well, then we know that, the file types of the encrypted files. So we want to scan those other hosts as well. So should they have that system there as well, they have these files there, we can then investigate and do any backups necessary so nothing does occur, right? So again, in our recovery phase, it's everything looking at getting things back to normal. Again, also highly, and I can't stress enough the communication component across all these phases. So I'm going to put another asterisk here just for communications and ensuring that we are doing the effective communications across all parts. And finally is our lessons learned. So training, do we need to brief the organization on the dangers of the ransomware? So there's some sort of briefs that may have to go out, and then maybe out of those briefs, maybe the action item is we have to do something monthly, maybe like a monthly briefing. And that could be something like maybe the executive briefing, or maybe a business unit briefing, or maybe staff briefing, like an all hands. We have to get all the users into that meeting and just say, hey, here's an update of recent threats, be aware of X, Y, Z, and run these things quite monthly. So that could be a lessons learned. Again, kind of going through the training and then bettering our organization to respond and react and be proactive to these threats, right? So again, we can go away and then provision that step-by-step guide as well. So maybe it's something to do with the playbook or a playbook scenario that needs to be revisited. Okay, so we kind of go through the lessons learned and define what all these parameters look like. So they're kind of the 4 phases when we talk about ransomware. Let's jump over to this next slide and let's take a look at social engineering. So this is a phishing example. Typically, phishes are highly, highly common in a lot of environments now. So I want to sort of talk about this as well. And you kind of start to see how we start looking at doing our investigation, right? So let's start off with the first part. So if a phishing email comes through with a user, well, what's the first thing that we do? And the first thing that I would do is our analysis, right? So I would analyze I would firstly investigate the email. So I would look at, again, URLs, domains. Is there some sort of image on the screen? Is it a link? Is it an attachment? Right? And there's a lot of things, right? You can start looking at the header information. You can start looking at where this thing maybe potentially came from. Is it an attachment? Is it a program? Maybe our gateway didn't filter a specific .exe for whatever reason, and then someone may have clicked that. So, we can start defining this, right? So And then from there, I would look at things more in the lines of, well, what time was this? So maybe that's a specific time function, or maybe someone's doing some recon on some specific users at a specific time interval. So defining what that looks like. Again, what were they doing at that time? So I'm just going to say doing, because maybe there's a certain activity that people are doing at a certain time, and then it creates this sort of urgency or this dependency to click, download, install this certain thing, right? So from here, what I would do is I would immediately forward this over to our incident response team. So when we talk about our containment here, um, the only reason I would do this is just to sort of speed the process up, because what would traditionally happen is with analysis, I don't want to be sitting at 5 users' computers and trying to investigate and analyze what's going on. So what I want to do is I want to take a copy of that email or a copy of that, the attachment of some sort, and then forward that over to our incident response team. Maybe we've got our certain systems here that we can go away and then investigate, but at least we've got a copy of it from user. I'll just put user X here because we've taken a copy of that, we've forwarded over along with the attachments, and then we can continue our investigation. So we don't obviously waste, these 5 people their time to investigate and analyze the incident. So now that we've got the details, we can continue on with our investigation and analyze this threat. So again, our attachments could be source details that could be provided of some sort. So source details, etc. Right? So from here, then we can obviously go away, we can scan our email systems and see if the source email address has been seen anywhere else before. So maybe we can go into our seg, type in the URL, type in the domain, maybe type in the actual the title of the email. So in the subject field, there's a title component, and see if there's other people that have maybe accessed that or trying to access that, and then we can obviously be proactive with that. So again, we can then follow up with the users if they've experienced the same thing or if they experience something different, and then we can understand and very definedly scope out and analyze the actual incident. So containment, as we spoke about containment, so we forward this to our incident response team. I would go away and just delete that email entirely so it cannot be accessed for now. That can be our quick containment. And then recovery, as we talk about recovering the system, recovery, again, bringing everything back up to normal. So it could be a series of blocking necessary traffic. Again, the domain names, the URLs, the email addresses based on the attack, looking for other copies of that email, I would also run the endpoint security system. So if we've got any sort of EDRs, maybe there's a certain, fill in the blank vendor that we're using on our endpoints, I would go away, I would run that scan, make sure that that system is not infected with anything else, or obviously be sure that nothing else is happening. And then I would continue to ensure that there's other good measures as well. So ensuring that maybe the users will then have to go away and reset passwords, because chances are if a specific user has done something, maybe they didn't tell us the whole story, right? So sometimes what users will try to do is they may hide the information from us, right? They say, look, I didn't enter any details, and we can't sort of guess as well either. So so should they have gone and entered any credentials or any sort of information in that in that email, because at the time of the assessment, maybe we're still unsure about this. So for recovery, if the users haven't told us enough of the story, we'll go away and obviously reset the password and ensure that the credentials have been changed. And then obviously communication, part of that process as well. So ensuring our comms plan and comms is effectively across the business. And then finally moving into our lessons learned. So again, I will do things like informing the business. So inform the team, inform the organization, let them know what's happened, let them know the extent of the attack as well, to be looking out for these things. So I say look out. So maybe this could be further training, and obviously getting approval from this form from our executive team if we have to run further simulations and further training to educate certain users. And then again, highlighting their security concerns or the areas of compromise, the email address, the description, the title, etc., and then performing our lessons learned across the infrastructure. So that's the other 2 areas of the playbooks. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, see you all in the next video.